All right, so we're going to do poetry notes in two parts. This week we're going to focus on the elements of poetry, focusing on figurative language and other components of what we see in a poem. First thing to know is form. Form relates to the arrangement of lines and rhyme patterns. So how does the poem look? How did they organize their lines? Is there a pattern to the rhyme? So this involves a lot of questions. How long should the lines be? Are they grouped into stanzas, almost like verses in a song? Does it follow an established form, or are they making up their own? Are they following a rhyme scheme? Is it free verse? A lot of questions poets answer as they create their poems. A stanza is a single unit in a poem. So if you're thinking of songs, we'd call that a verse. So in this poem example, there are how many stanzas? 2. Established forms follow a traditional pattern. So other poets who wrote long ago, like Shakespeare, would have written poems and then other people follow that pattern. Things like rhythm, rhyme scheme, number of lines, stanzas, those are all part of form. There's different types of poetry. Things like those that tell a story would be narrative poems. There's free verse poems. Elegies are mourning poems. Lyric poems are kind of like songs. There's lots of different types of poems. Tone, you should know this word already. Just like in a story, tone refers to the poet's attitude about the subject. So, how do they feel about whatever it is they're writing about? So, it's going to be an adjective that describes that. So, here's a quick check. So, read this short little poem, and what do you think the tone is? Connotation, those are the ideas or feelings that give a word some sort of additional meaning beyond the literal. So there are so many synonyms in English, and those different words might mean a similar thing, but they have different connotations, slightly different meanings. Connotations, if you think about school, what kind of connotations? Is it a positive or negative feel with that word? Summer, most people have a positive connotation with that one. Different sports, you might have a positive or negative connotation. So if you think of the word visitor, that's pretty neutral. If you say a guest, it'd be a positive connotation, and an intruder would be a negative connotation. So words have, think about like a range from positive to negative. Some words are kind of right in the middle and neutral. Some words are a little positive or really positive, somewhere on that scale of connotation. Denotation is what the word actually means. If you take out the feelings and emotions related to words, the denotation is what's actually in the dictionary, the basic definition. Poetry, connotation and denotation are very important because a writer only has so many words to include in a poem, and they have to pick their words very carefully based on the sounds and the feels that they want to get across. So connotation and denotation are even more important in poetry. Imagery, this is what you did with your quick activity, looking at how do you describe things using images, using the 5 senses. So it creates images in your mind, incorporating what it looks like as well as the other senses. The rock's wrinkled face, a carpet of red sand, those are examples. Help you imagine what this looks like. So, like I said, it relies on all those senses. So he rolled with a jeweled twinkle. It helps you picture. Over the cobbles he clattered and clashed. We got some alliteration there as well that help the sounds. You can hear what those hooves probably sounded like on the cobblestones. Taste, they drank his ale instead. That's what they're doing. Touch, he scarce could reach your hand. That feel, so you can picture him trying to touch her. And then smell, his hair like moldy hay. Probably not a very pleasant smell. All right, so look at this little poem by Emily Dickinson. And can you find a couple examples of imagery? Figurative language. Most of these terms are a review from 6th grade or elementary school, but every year we will review them and you will still need them again in 8th grade because we often forget what's the differences between those different types of figurative language. As a whole, reminder, figurative language makes the connections between different things. We make connections between two things that are not the same or dissimilar. I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up and stop to feed itself at tanks. You can think, okay, well, maybe we're talking about a horse here because we're talking about lapping the miles and licking and stopping to eat, but we're actually talking about a train. They're making a comparison, a metaphor between those two things. It helps us think about things in a different way, which is one of the cool things about figurative language. Personification is a type of metaphor that gives non-living things human-like qualities. If you make something do something or say something that wouldn't usually do or say anything, like the sun walking, that would be personification. You're making it seem like a person. Little word study note. Ification means the process of, so personification is the process of making something seem like a person. Help you remember that term. The sun walked. Well, the sun doesn't really walk. We're making it seem like a person. Simile, that compares two unlike things using like, as, resembles, a word of comparison. So if you are showing two things that are not alike and saying they're alike, and there's a word that connects them, then that's a simile. There came a wind like a bugle. So we know it's a loud wind. We're making a connection there. Metaphor is where you say something is something else. There's not a word of comparison. You just say one thing is something else. Stars are great drops of golden dew. Well, they're not really, but we are saying they are stars and golden dew. An extended metaphor is a metaphor that keeps going, like the one about lapping the miles and licking up stuff and feeding itself. There's extending that metaphor between the horse and the train. Another example here by Shakespeare, comparing the world and the stage, and he just kind of continues exploring the different ways that those two things are alike. Hyperbole is an extreme exaggeration. Okay, I'll take the garbage out. By then it's too late. The garbage reached across the state from New York to the Golden Gate. Well, that's not likely that the garbage would go that far. It's extreme exaggeration, making a point. When you say, I'm starving, or I'm so hungry I could eat a horse, those are both usually hyperbole, the way that we use them. So quick check. What figures of speech do you see in these lines? And then lastly, this is a review from right before break. An allusion, remember, refers to something from culture, from history, something famous, but it makes a reference, assuming that people have that background. Like, don't act like a Romeo. Well, we have the background knowing Romeo is probably talking about Romeo and Juliet, so don't be like super lovey-dovey. So the reminder from before break, an allusion is where we reference something from common culture history that we think people will know. So that is the first part of poetry. So we're going to explore a little bit looking at imagery and figurative language before we jump into the sounds of a poem.